Hello and welcome to IFMA's webinar, Re-Entering the Workplace, a strategic framework for facility managers for immediate, short, and long-term facility planning. I do want to let everyone know that they have been muted for audio quality. And if you have any questions at any time during this webinar, please feel free and type them into the question box. And I also do want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded, and you can find a copy of the recording within 24 to 48 hours on IFMA.org in the COVID-19 area. So if you go to IFMA.org under Knowledge, there's a tab and a page dedicated to all the COVID-19 information. Please feel free to share any information on that page with people you think would find it valuable. At this time, I'm happy to introduce John Correa, who's currently the IFMA Global Board Chair. John, the floor is yours.
Okay, excellent. Well, welcome, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. The facility manager's role amid the COVID-19 pandemic in our industry is to mitigate risk and assure our employees that we have taken the necessary steps to protect life and property and provide the optimal environment to promote productivity. I would encourage you all, as we navigate through these uncharted waters, to collect, connect, and collaborate with industry-wide experts in the FM world. I know that many of you are faced with 3 or 4 major aspects of COVID-19 plans. One of them, of course, has to do with make sure you update your company's business continuity plan to include post-pandemic disruption plans. Another big topic coming up down the road is working at home guidelines. So for those companies or corporations that don't have teleport or telecommute policies, that's something you'll be looking at. Of course, all of us are doing what we can to keep up with all the health and wellness protective measure guidelines, and some of that will be addressed in today's presentation. But of course, the presentation today is re-entering the workplace. So as many of you can attest to, information is coming to the industry at a furious pace that leaves facility managers wondering where to find actionable information and resources that will help them support the returning workforce quickly, safely, and effectively. In response, a team of your IFMA peers came together as a rapid response task force to tackle the same challenges facing all facility managers around the world. This group of volunteers has been developing a framework as a resource to help you as you plan to reoccupy your facilities and support returning staff, occupants, and other stakeholders. So at this point, I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Chris Hodges, who's going to kick this program off. Chris Hodges is an IFMA Fellow. And so Chris, take it away, please.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Again, my name is Chris Hodges. I'm with Facility Engineering Associates, and I'm also the current chair of IFMA's Certificate Commission. It's been my pleasure over the past couple of weeks to work with this rapid response task force. As I'm sure you know, and as John mentioned, it's a tall task to absorb all the information that's coming at us at a huge pace, and it's increasing every day. And we're really grateful to IFMA for providing this platform for us to talk about this important issue. So first, a few introductions to our task force. I want to introduce David King. David is with Amazon's Global Network Group. Jim Lesh. Jim is with Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. And Casey Martin. Casey is with Jacobs Strategic Consulting Group. And David and Jim and Casey are going to lead us through some case studies today. I also wanted to introduce Terence Horseman. Terence is with MCFT out of the UK. And although you may not be hearing from Terence today, I just did want to mention he's been doing an awful lot of the heavy lifting in this task force and taking all the content and making it really nice and understandable so that as we walk through it. So thank you very much for that, Terence. And we also have Rick Willis. Rick is with Amazon, also with the North American Customer Fulfillment Group. I don't want to forget all of the folks at IFMA that brought us together with this and making this information sharing possible. There's a huge cast of characters from the education group and to the IFMA leadership and the IFMA board. So thank you for all the support and helping us bring this information forward. So Josh, if you could move to the next slide. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to start with the role of the FM and introduce our strategic framework, the strategic framework this group's been working on. We will be able to present a couple of case studies and then finish up with how you can actually apply it and use this as a tool to help you formulate your plan. So the real primary objective of this webinar is to introduce that framework for re-entering facilities, but it's not just about how to get back in to your facilities and workplaces. It's more about a continuous improvement process for strategizing and planning for the future, because it's not only about getting back to work or getting back to our workplace, but there's going to be a lot of changes we're going to experience over the next few months, and then probably over the next few years as we continue, as John mentioned, our business continuity plans and plans going forward, so that if things like this happen again, we're going to have to be ready and learn some lessons from what we learned in this environment we have today. So the framework's going to provide you a model for how to do this. It'll give you some examples, and then we'll show you how to access that framework so you can use it for your own organization. So Josh, if you move to the next slide, please. So one of the challenges in building a strategic framework, and a challenge for this webinar, is that everybody's looking for answers. That information is just coming at us at a pace that's clearly taxing our ability to absorb it and to put into actionable steps we can take. And not only that, the information's changing every day, especially for things like health effects, preventive measures, effective ways of doing things like cleaning and disinfecting. The knowledge base that we have coming from our health professionals is still uncertain in some respects in terms of things like transmission and so on. So we're having to deal with that on a daily basis and then determine ways to make our facilities healthier and safer as we return. So what we're offering here is a structured thought process to guide you through the various issues and questions that you should consider in reopening your facilities, and hopefully give you a process that you can integrate into your long-term facility strategic plan. So that's the way to manage this and improve your long-term strategic facility plan. The most effective way for an FM to help your organization is to ask the right questions, locate the best resources, and integrate your plan with your organization's leadership. That's the business leadership, health and safety groups, human resources, IT, security, risk management, and any other stakeholders that make your own organization function. So that's what we're going to focus on as a framework to help you do that. So Josh, if you can move to the next slide, please. So if we think back just a few weeks, and it's really kind of hard to believe it's only been such a short period of time, many facilities around the world literally had to shut down and walk away. For many, the change was so abrupt, it was kind of like turning a light switch, turning out the lights and locking the doors. For critical facilities like hospitals and those that house emergency responders, communication networks, utilities, folks like that, the challenge was even greater. How do you stay operational with fewer staff and make sure that the facilities we're in are functioning? So either there was no opportunity to properly shut down, or we were faced with short-term operational restrictions that only a few regions in our world had ever seen before. So we didn't have a lot of experience in many areas of the world, and sometimes we just don't have the resources to do the job properly. So the lack of a structured shutdown plan really led us to significant reductions or elimination of services like maintenance, cleaning, security, and things of that nature. One of the things that the strategic framework brings is a structured way to re-enter our facilities, to anticipate and plan for short and long-term changes that we need in order to operate in a new environment, and also to learn from our experience so that we can better serve our organizations again in case we're faced with, hopefully less challenging things, but challenges in the future. So Josh, if you can move to the next slide, please. So in order to better prepare for reentry, we need a plan. That plan needs to consider several key factors, but one of the complicating things we have in the facility management business is that we represent so many different facilities in organizations, where you go from offices to airports, research, medical, distribution facilities, utilities and infrastructure, government, museums, sports and entertainment, you name it. We represent all types of facilities and all types of organizations that manage them and operate them in vastly different ways. So what we really need is to consider, when we put together a plan for reentry, we need to figure out or align with our organizational needs in order to properly function in the facility management world. We also need to be able to anticipate and prepare for what that new environment might be. What's the new normal? That's the phrase you keep hearing time after time in these times, is what will be the new environment we're going to need to operate in. We do know it's going to be different. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, and we don't know how long intermediate changes might have to last to move us into the long term. So what we really need is that reentry plan that considers the right input and coordination with the right stakeholders. So Josh, if you'd move on to the next one. There's a really good reason the FM is such an important part of this process. This is what we train for. It's what we're best equipped to do. We do that because we're the ones who bring enterprise knowledge that link to the mission, vision, and values of our organization. That's the knowledge of your organization. We bring the competency. For over 25 years, IFMA has been tracking and mapping skills, knowledge, abilities, and competencies of the FM to do their job well. And finally, the FM is connected to the facility industry through IFMA and the broader industry at large, and lots of resources to bring to bear to be good problem solvers, and the ability to share those ideas and practices that make us better as a profession. So one thing that's always been really incredibly strong in IFMA is the ability to think critically and to draw on those competencies like leadership and strategy and finance and business and risk management, and understanding what keeps our workforce, occupants and visitors safe and healthy and productive for our organization. So that's the way we wanted to open this up. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Rick, and Rick's going to talk more about the framework and introducing the framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. This is Rick Willis. I just wanted to say what an honor it was to be a part of this team to put this framework together. As we began this process just a couple of weeks ago, we made a key assumption that there's not going to be one right way to re-enter our facilities and deal with the challenges that we're going to have as we move forward. We've seen that in our local and state responses to the event, and we'll see it as we begin reopening. There's not going to be a right way to do, or one right way to do this. So as we took that concept, we determined a one-size checklist is not going to be the answer for everyone. As Chris mentioned, we all have different types of facilities, different organizations, and we're doing many different things. So we took a project management approach to building this strategic framework. From that PM approach, we took a plan, do, check, act construct, and we placed milestones or different priorities within each block. You know, we all have different priorities that we're going to be responding to, and we believe this framework will essentially create a mind map to help you produce the right answers that you already have, but help you understand the questions that you need to ask. And I think that's a really important part about what we do, is making sure we're asking the right questions. So this essentially allows us to prioritize, identify our required activities, go through an evaluation step to say, is our plan working the way that we expected it to work, and what improvements do we need to make from what we've learned since reopening or going through a continued operation. So taking the project management construct to the next level, we placed the framework of priorities and activities and so forth into different swim lanes. And we assigned the swim lanes to the categories of people, places, and processes. I know this is quite an eye chart. We're going to break out here in a moment with the next chart to kind of explain this a little bit better. But for instance, in the plan people phase, we would hope to generate questions around who would my stakeholders be in the form of what level of reentry am I gonna take on? Applying this to the plan, do, act, check. One of the things I hope you're thinking about now is what are the milestones I need to be thinking about, and what would my reentry process look like, knowing that there is not one right answer, but we need to find that best solution for our organization. Next slide, please. So diving deeper into the people plan phase, I'll give you a scenario as to how to kind of think about this framework and how it could help you as guiding you to the questions to find those solutions. So consider that your situation, because every situation will be different, your situation is going to be a delayed ramp up process before you go into full operations for your organization. These blocks within this piece of the framework, I would hope would cause you to ask some questions like, who are the stakeholders that's going to provide the solutions to execute this scenario? For instance, where does HR come into play in terms of helping set HR policies for those that are working on site or those that are going to continue to work from home? What are your essential functions to operate the facility as the FN for that space? Just because the operation is not going full force back into to 100% operations on the near term, that doesn't necessarily mean that the services you provide would not replicate a full force operation. Other things to consider if you are limiting your head count or the folks you bring back to your team. Do you have regulatory preventive maintenance activities that are coming up during this slower re-ramp process? Are you burdened with ongoing projects that require vendor management? Do you need more people to manage those vendors? Do you have activities that you're contractually obligated to that you might need more headcount for? Such as landlord obligations if you're in a lease situation. Paying attention to your employees, to your team's reentry. Do you need to consider different shifts or matching different folks that normally don't work together together because of their skill sets or their training levels? Another consideration. Will you have vendor support issues for the vendors that will be supporting you in your facility? Because remember, they're also going to be re-ramping or ramping back up, maybe at a different pace than what you are, to return back to work from this event. And then the last thing I'll identify as a potential question is, what does your team safety program look like given a re-ramp process? Does your safety program look exactly the same as what it did before? What's the mindset of your folks? And to step on a soapbox for a minute, safety is never more important, in my opinion, than during a perceived crisis. People think a little bit differently. They take a few more risks than maybe they should. What type of attention, as you're going through this re-ramp process, that leads to a solid safety program so no one gets hurt? And who are you partnering with as stakeholders to ensure that that program happens the way it should? So this is essentially the mind map that we've come up with. Hopefully it generates thought and questions, guides questions for you to be asking yourself as you build your program back to where it was before this event. And we'll go into some case studies next. And I'll introduce David King to present his case.
Thank you, Rick. This is David King. I'm the global network workplace leader for selling partner support at Amazon. If we could get the next slide, please. So I'm responsible for 22 locations worldwide, operating in 7 countries. That presents quite a challenge. And one of the things that was touched upon already was the fact that many of our sites were shut down almost instantaneously, depending on the locale and the governing authorities. Okay, the next slide, please, Josh. So one of the things that I've realized as some of my sites have been opening up around the globe is that my facility managers were initially focused on the day-to-day operations, making sure that there's a cleaning protocol for all different aspects in the facility. And while that was great, that was something that we sorely needed, because things do change. My operating costs are going to probably go up because of the cleaning protocols now in place. My cafeteria vendor is probably going to have to work with me on the cost, because they have to take certain measures. For example, face screens in front of the servery area, where we previously didn't have those. And so what I realized is that this is all great, but what happens before the people arrive? And that's really where we started to focus. We started to look at the employees and the business. And I should point out that at Amazon, safety is our #1 priority. That's the first thing we look at, and the customer is second. It's actually first in most cases, but from a facility perspective, we have to look at our people. And one of the things that we started to look at was, okay, with children still being at home, spouses still working from home, what does this mean for the transportation of our employees? And in order to really get a better understanding, we had to pull together a recommissioning team, which included HR, legal, risk, IT, and I really started talking about and deep diving on some of these areas. One of the things that I realized was that when people left, they took their monitors with them. They took their desktops or their laptops with them. Sometimes they even took their chairs with them. It was such a quick exodus from the facility that protocol kind of took a sideline to employee need. And now that I have to put all the lights back on and get people back in place, the first thing that came to mind is, well, if they're showing up at 8 o'clock in the morning with their laptop or desktop in hand, how is that going to work? They're certainly going to miss key production time when they get back in. So working with our IT folks and our local facility technicians, we started to put together a plan about how we're going to get extra attic stock for some of these components that may have gone home. We do intend to recollect them as people come back to work, but it's going to be more of a curbside service where somebody will meet them, there'll be a handoff, and they can proceed to go through the entry process and get into their workplace. So what does that mean for my team and the IT team is, well, where are you going to store all this? How are you going to get it ready? With all the social media that's been going on, keeping people connected while they're working at home, there's probably been some software or applications that have been downloaded to their equipment. And while we have safety measures in place, that doesn't stop everything. So again, that's another thing that we have to make sure that we wipe their drives if necessary, or at least we re-image them to make sure they're back up to our company standard. As we go through the different categories, and I'll pick another one, for example, that was really an eye-opener, was activating all the key cards to get back in the facility. People just start showing up and their badges don't work because, well, we shut down the badge scanning system when we shut down the site. Well, you have to re-enter those in many systems. So that's actually quite a process. I have one site with over 2,800 employees stretched across 11 floors. And talking to the IT team and the security team about how long it's going to take to reactivate those badges. It's going to take 2 to 3 weeks. So again, you start plotting these things out in a project format, and you determine what your long pole is. The other thing that came into play as well was, well, gosh, many companies are thinking, well, people went home and everything worked well. Service levels were met. The business's customers were impacted very little. Why are we going back to a brick and mortar? And I've heard the sentiment echoed across other companies I've kept in contact with during this epidemic. And it seems to be a current mindset on the real estate side of the equation. And so what I can say is that we're looking at waves of people coming back as restrictions are lifted. And that varies country by country, and even in the US, state by state and city by city. So it becomes very complex. And so this means that you really have to align yourself with the business leaders, with the IT folks, with HR, risk, legal, what are our requirements? And how many people are we going to continue to have work at home? So some discussions may be, well, who are the critical people that need to get back to the office? That while they've been able to manage their job load working from home, it's more important they get back into the work environment ahead of everybody else. And so what ends up happening is you create waves of people. Instead of having, for example, 2,800 people hit one of my facilities all at one time, which would be a total nightmare, leadership is looking at bringing them back in waves, the most critical first, and so on. And there's been an internal, ranking of those business needs. So that helps us with some of these things like, reactivating security badges, redistributing new equipment and furniture. And so that's an important thing to be cognizant of. We also have to make sure that our landlord is ready for this. We can't expect that on day one, wherever you're at, that it could be in 2 weeks, it could be in 4 weeks, but will that landlord be ready? And oh, by the way, who's responsible for all this? Who's going to put in the thermal scanning in the lobby? Well, at the sites that we lease, it's going to be a partnership between the landlord and Amazon. And there's power that has to be brought out to thermal scanning machines. However you're going to do it, there's various models out there. There's also handheld, because one thing we've learned is that having the thermal scanners set up at the entry point, that equipment is not readily available in all parts of the world. Governments and hospitals get first priority. So then we start looking at handheld. Now that's going to require training and the appropriate personnel to do that, and the safety measures that go into place in doing that kind of an operation. And as we start plugging all these things together, looking at all the different areas that we have to address, including third-party vendors like cleaning companies, cafeteria vendors, and so on, we start plotting them out. We understand where the long pole is, or what the long lead item is going to be. And I've also realized that depending on your day one, when people are going to be back to work, that you have to have a working backward schedule. So what's your lead time for different things will change. If day one means all 200 people are coming back to your facility, and your IT folks, your security folks can get everything back up and ready for them in a week, well, that changes the whole dynamic. And that's why it's important to really put together a programmatic approach to day one. The other thing is the health and safety protocols. You have to work closely with your HR folks, your risk people, your legal people. We all know what the government's telling us, and we have to incorporate that into what it is we're going to do for getting ready for day one. Things like transportation. What are our transportation companies going to do? So, for example, in one location, I have transport buses, shuttle buses, picking people up from the train station and bringing them to the building. So now I've got to work with that vendor and convince them that the policies and procedures that we are enacting can be used to some degree there. So that means social distancing within a shuttle bus. So, again, my operating costs are going to go up. And that's because that vendor's going to have more shuttles, more drivers, because instead of a 25-person fully occupied shuttle going back and forth, you're probably going to get half of that, if not less. So again, you have to start looking at all the components to getting that day one lined up. Can we go to the next slide, please? So again, talking about the building itself and talking with the landlord, one of the things that we determined was that when you have a parking garage attached to one of our sites, and you have pedestrians walking amongst automobile traffic, motorcycle traffic, how are we going to number one, protect them, protect the employees that are walking back through there? And we thought, well, they do that every day. What's the big deal? Well, it's a different situation now. You have the social distancing that you have to maintain, and then you have the queue as they walk into the building. There's the elevator to get them to the floor or get them to the actual building. So there's a lot of things that have to be thought out. One of the things that we're doing is we're actually striping a pedestrian walkway through a garage, and we're putting just a 6-foot or 2-meter indicators, so that if the queue backs up, that we're still maintaining that social distancing. Who would have thought that we would have had to start doing things like that in our parking garage? I know I didn't. And so then we're looking at the same thing for the elevator queues. And one very important thing that came to mind was, even though one of my buildings may have high-speed elevators, I've got one that's got 8 elevator cars, but it's one of those systems that are automated. So if you push the button for the 5th floor, the algorithms in the software that controls the elevator is going to determine when that car shows up. Well, I'm talking to the landlord about putting them all on manual and having operators in there so that instead of having 10 people crammed into an elevator car, I might only be able to get 3 or 4. And we can't wait for the software to readjust the speed at which those elevators hit the lobby, especially if you have people trying to get in and start their work shift. That's going to be very problematic. The other thing too is the bus stations, the train stations. How are those people going to be able to get to work if those are on restricted schedules as well? Again, so you have to be able to reach out to the community and find out what's happening there. Services, like messengers, food delivery, package delivery, and so on. People have been in quarantine for anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks, depending on where in the world you're at. And to have that favorite food restaurant, deliver you your favorite lunch to your office is something. It's a luxury that people have a taste for now, if you pardon the pun. And so, how are we going to manage that food being delivered into the building to the front desk? And then again, talking about the SOPs, the standard operating procedures with the building. Again, there's some liability that could be coming up in those kinds of situations. So it's important that all of your stakeholders, IT, HR, and so on, are engaged in those conversations with the landlord to make sure that we're all aligned and there's transparency in the process we're going to use. And then the last thing I want to talk about relative to this was, again, working backwards from day one. What's your schedule look like? So what's your business strategy? Does your business decide it's going to keep 50% of the people working from home for a while until the local pandemic numbers get better? Are you going to take a stepped approach based on the local data? That's something you need to understand. And part of that work from home contingent as well. What do you need to continue providing for them? Next slide, please. And so we start looking at our capacity plan. Again, many of facility managers in my sites around the world were focusing on what happens when people are back. But before they get back, we have to go through a very rigorous capacity planning analysis. We did a gap analysis across all of our sites, every floor, to look at how many people we could fit in the cafeteria, how many people we could fit in the workplace. And it was quite an eye-opener. So this could work to a company's advantage in some ways if you're going to stage the comeback, in waves. But also you need to understand where your gaps may be. So I have a situation where I'm getting ready to launch a new site, but now that new site with social distancing in place and mandated by the government, that facility that we're about to launch is not going to be enough. We're actually looking at a second and third local facility to accommodate these people as they come back. Even though they're coming back in waves, the growth plan and all these other factors for that business have to come into view here. And so you'll see here one of our sites. This is part of our gap analysis, and we're looking at a 44% capacity, usable capacity based on social distancing. And another floor is running a lot lower, actually at 39%. Again, those of you in the real estate side will understand the idea behind loss factors and usable versus rentable square footage and how that plays in to your overall equation. The other thing that we're looking at as well is the just human nature factors that people say, well, yeah, that really wouldn't happen to me. I'm healthy. I go running and I do all these things. But as a company, we have to look at taking protective measures to protect our employees. So we're looking at blocking non-usable workstations. So for example, on the screen, you'll see blue dots where people can actually sit, maintain the guidelines proposed by the government ordinance. And so we have a lot of vacancy there, but what's to stop somebody from just coming in and sitting down next to somebody and just blow the scheme right out of the water? So we're looking at measures that we can take to make those stations inoperable. Now, in some sites that we run 24/7, that may be problematic because of shift overlap and different lunch break timings and so on. But that's one of the things that we have to do a deep dive on, understand that. The other thing too is that, as I mentioned earlier, some people took chairs home. Most people took their computers home. Well, in order for them to show up and get back to work, that desk has to be up and running. So I think that covers about everything I have. I'd like to turn it over right now to Casey. Take it away.
Thank you, David. I'm Casey Martin. I'm with Jacobs in our strategic consulting group. And what I did today was we're looking at aviation as a case study. So instead of selecting a specific airport, in the aviation world, it's an end-to-end framework. So we're going to look at some of the overall applications of the framework to the aviation world. And what makes it a little bit unique is that in the aviation world, It wasn't necessarily shut down voluntarily. It was more a lack of customers that forced the shutdown. And so addressing that means we have to address the customer's uncertainty about being in the airport. So that's a lot of the focus of the new processes and framework coming into place there. And the way airports are set up, some of them are governed by private consortiums, some by city-owned entities. And so it makes the rules governing airports a little bit different. I think a really good example is one of the responses to face masks. I believe in Houston, the governor has issued a mandate that anybody over the age of 10 outside needs to be wearing a face mask. So that gives the airport, which is a city of Houston owned entity, the ability to fine people up to $1,000 for not wearing a mask. So that's a pretty good deterrent and behavioral influencer. Whereas San Francisco is starting to hand out masks as airport passengers arrive into the airports, and considering issuing warnings to passengers, not tickets, just a warning, something that says we're watching. Another interesting topic about the airports is just the evolving maintenance requirements that's going to happen in our holding queues. You'll start to see different, plexiglass screening, management of interaction points, cleaning products that have longer wet times. Those are being hailed at 1 to 4 minute wet times. So you're going to start to see a lot of wet surfaces are going to have to be managed. Next slide, please. And then as we move into the place side of it, there's a lot of talk about the touchless environment, which is going to be really applicable to the airport environment. I don't think anybody wants to go into a public entity with international travelers and start touching stuff. The days of licking your seat to reserve it are long gone. Part of what we're going to see too is a change in food service delivery, and this is geared to make passengers feel more at ease. And so what the conversations and the new norm are looking like is food service delivery is a good example of a process change where you use your phone to make your seating in the holding queue, use your phone to order your food, turn on your tracking device, and the food service folks will deliver that to you at your seat. And what that's going to start to change is how we use those holding queues. So now we're going to have families sitting in there, ordering their food, using them as eating areas, as long-term stay places. As the arrival times get longer, the arrival times meaning airports are going to start to recommend that you get to the airport 4 hours in advance. And that's to address all of the health screening concerns, all of the check-in issues, and just gives people more time to get through some of the new processes. So that's going to put quite a load on the holding queues, which currently are not designed to hold 100% of seating occupants, which I don't think will be a problem right now because I don't think airplanes will be 100% full for a couple of years, a couple of months at least anyway. All right, next slide, please. And then we transition to the people themselves. They're going to be undergoing new preventative control measures. Not all of them are adept at hygienic training, how to take temperatures, how to administer face masks. And so they'll have to undergo some skills gap. Passengers as well, there's going to be no meters and greeters in the airport, so where we drop people off and say goodbye is going to change, and it's going to be up to facility managers to manage that, because I'm sure as you guys have all seen, the drop-off points of airports are not pretty now, so imagine that with no meters and greeters allowed inside. That's going to create whole new flow patterns, whole new expectations for where people say goodbye, how they get their luggage out. And then even as far as boarding, passengers are going to have to be retrained to remain seated in that hold queue until they get notified on mobile phones, something that stops that aggregation at the gate. And then the final question that everybody's asking in the aviation industry is, what will it take to get people back into the airport? And the bottom line for that is assurance. They've got to see cleaning happening. They've got to feel comfortable that they're safe in that environment. All right, that does it for the aviation, and now we're going to turn it over to Jim.
Hello, everybody. This is Jim Lesh, CFM IFMA fellow, and in the short amount of time we have left, I want to share with you how the Applied Physics Laboratory is addressing this from a communications perspective. A little bit of background: we are an essential business organization, and so as such, we never really completely shut down. Next, please. To give everybody a sense of the scope of our operation, we have about 7,000 staff members occupying 20 different major buildings on 3 campuses, some owned and some leased. One of the things that has helped us in keeping our staff safe is that our diversified business portfolio is a mix of both classified and unclassified programs. What that has done for us is that it has allowed really almost 2/3 of our staff to work remotely. Next, please. We've developed and enhanced our communication plan to make sure that all of our stakeholders have access to the guidance, policies, and directions regarding work assignments, personal protection, illness intervention, visitor restrictions, and other issues. Next. In addition to personal contact with our vendors and suppliers, we have provided detailed information on our external web page. We have extensively used the Center for Disease Control guidance, and this guidance, along with our information from our other in-house experts, is really what's driving the lab policies. Next, please. Internally, we use a number of different resources, a number of different modalities, if you will, to make sure that our staff is well informed, has their questions answered. We have a very robust internal web page, which includes FAQs rather, tips and practices. We have a blog post. We have staff sharing stories and experiences. One of the key things I think that is very helpful for us is that we have an open forum, including the ability for staff to make suggestions and then the appropriate part of the lab organization to offer an official response. Next, please. What we've done is also leveraged our relationship with the Johns Hopkins Medical System. This for us has been a very much a go-to resource to make sure that we are providing, authoritative, up-to-date, comprehensive information. Planning ahead, what our executive committee right now is doing is that they have scheduled several tabletop exercises in the coming weeks to more fully understand the issues and plan for the return of more staff to campus. The results of these exercises is what we will then use to feed into our ongoing communications plan. So in very short order, that's where we are with APL. And I now want to turn this back over to Chris Hodges to explain IFMA's next steps to assist our members in dealing with this unique issue.
Thank you very much, Jim. Over the past couple of weeks, this task force, as well as IFMA and many other groups, have been asked a lot of questions about this pandemic. In setting up our Q&A portion of this webinar, we needed to take a little bit different approach. Rather than try to answer questions about health issues that are still being evaluated by other professionals like doctors and disease experts and scientists, we decided the best way to introduce a strategic framework is to ask the FM to ask the right question. This framework was built around the solid management model of Plan, Do, Check, Act, as Rick has introduced, and our panelists have shown how they've put it into place. And it's also been integrated with the FM's emphasis on people, place, and process. So we've managed to put together that framework around those very, very important concepts in our business. Here's a couple of examples of the kind of questions we've been seeing. They're around HVAC systems, cleaning and disinfecting, the use of PPE and masks and things of that nature. for answers to these questions, your first source should be your local, regional, national government. Rather than developing detailed guidelines themselves, they will often refer you to specialized organizations like the World Health Organization, the National Health Service in Great Britain, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, or in the US, the CDC, or Center for Disease Control. Beyond that, you can consult with professional organization resources like IFMA's Foundation's Pandemic Manual, the IFMA Coronavirus Resource Center, and industry organizations like ASHRAE and others that deal specifically with things like HVAC systems, or ISSA, the International Sanitary Supply Association, who offer comprehensive resources that get really into the details of things like cleaning, or things like air conditioning and HVAC systems, and those things that we're going to need a deeper dive into. And often those resources are offered on their websites through frequently asked questions and resource sharing. So with that, Josh, if you'd move to the next slide. We've got just a couple left here to close out. So the real value we have is to add to your knowledge base using this framework to develop your plan for your organization and for your facility. We've offered a structured thought process to guide you through the various issues and questions you should consider in reopening your facilities. This framework that Rick introduced, and David, Casey, and Jim also walked us through, is your blueprint for making that plan. And you are really the most valuable asset you can be to your organization and to the profession of facility management. So that's why we started with this. This is about you, about what you can contribute to a reentry plan into our organization. Now, in the middle of this slide, you'll see a lot of resources. There's IFMA Engage, there's the Coronavirus Preparedness Resource Center, there's the Pandemic Manual, which has been reissued by the IFMA Foundation and updated. We have also partners out there like ISSA, who put together things like the Microbial Warrior Workshop. So what we'd like to do is continue to be a resource for you. You can see the link at the bottom of this page. You don't need necessarily the whole link. You can find it through going to www.ifma.org and looking for the Knowledge Center. So those are some resources that'll bring you to the far right on this slide, which is your strategic reentry plan. So what we would ask you to do, stay tuned to this website and places where you can find these resources. You'll be able to find this presentation, recordings, and all those resources you see here that you can tap into to help you develop your strategic plan. So in wrapping up, we have one final slide we wanted to show you. So Josh, if you could move to the last one. So, you know, they tell you in presentation school to never read a slide, but I'm going to do it this time. So FMs have always been armed with creativity, ingenuity, and imagination, invention, and problem solving. It's what we're known for. Not just remember, it's more valuable than ever, or urgent than ever, that we need to do this. We play a critical role and an essential role in our communities. So the one thing I wanted to leave you with is this, is remember, you can do this. Keep calm, be the voice of reason, and represent us well in the facility management business. So we want to thank you for your attention today. Above all, stay healthy, stay safe, and on behalf of IFMA and the task force, we thank you for tuning in. Thank you very much.